Kicking off the new year with a horror movie. A January horror movie. A Blumhouse January horror movie. Oh boy. Leigh Whannell did an incredible job writing Saw. I loved his film Upgrade, which is basically just a better version of Venom from 2018. Funny enough, it came out the same year. And when he reinvented The Invisible Man, I thought he did it in a brilliantly effective way. So when he decides to take on a werewolf movie, that should be a slam dunk, right? Well, now admittedly, this film is visually striking. Leigh Whannell knows how to frame shots, and much like his good friend and fellow horror director James Wan, he can work a camera pretty well. There's some wicked visual effects work done here to illustrate the perspective of our main character Blake, who's played by Christopher Abbott, as he progressively turns into a werewolf. So like to show off his heightened senses, they're gonna boost the saturation. They put lens flares over the other characters' eyes. They warp their voices so their dialogue is unintelligible. They shut out all the background lights so it solely focuses on him. They use it in a really creative way to show the different perspective between him and his wife and daughter. So they'll showcase a normal scene where the wife and daughter are trying to talk to him and he can't really be understood by them, and the camera swings around and slowly fades into his perspective, and then we show how he is perceiving what they're saying. It's just a really unique and effective way of showcasing what someone who is turning into a werewolf is perceiving in the world around them, and how that miscommunication is represented between him and another party. But my favorite use of this is when they're in a pitch black environment. For example, normal humans can't see in the dark, but because Blake has these heightened senses as a werewolf, he's able to make out a lot more in certain areas. And there's one scene in particular, you'll know it when you see it, where they utilize this in such a brilliant way that really builds tension effectively. Now, as for the acting, I'd say for the most part, it's serviceable, but it's nothing remarkable. Christopher Abbott, for example, is not a terrible actor. I haven't seen him in too much, but in this, I think when he's doing his normal human acting, he's not that great, and I don't know if it's a matter of his acting being off or the delivery of his lines just not being good because he got poor direction, or maybe the lines just weren't that great because, to be fair, not a lot of great dialogue in that first act especially. But when he's in these dialogue exchanges with his wife earlier on and with a couple other characters, it just feels really awkward, and maybe that was intentional, but it comes off really artificial. Like, I don't know if people would really be saying this. I don't know. A lot of this film comes off like surface level, not a whole lot of depth to it. But when he's playing the human part of his character, Blake, it's not that great. When he starts exhibiting more of these wolfman tendencies and starts becoming a lot more animalistic, that's where his performance really rings through, because he is very convincing as someone who is... Okay, look, I don't know if we're going to call this lycanthropy or not, because, I mean, it's literally werewolf thing, whatever, but it's, like, different in this movie. But as someone who is progressively turning into a werewolf and exhibiting all these different animalistic, feral tendencies, he does a great job of personifying that. The funny thing is, this film was originally going to be led by Ryan Gosling, so I'm just trying to imagine how Ryan Gosling would have played Blake differently than Christopher Abbott. I don't know if that would have been better or worse. I would like to think better, because I like Ryan Gosling as an actor. I think he can pull off a lot of different roles. I've never seen him do anything like whatever this film would have demanded from him. Would it have been good? I hope so. I think it could have been an improvement, but I think scheduling conflicts just got in the way. But it's a shame that we could have had Ryan Gosling in this film, and instead we got the foreigner from Kraven the Hunter. But hey, at least he's in a better movie this time, and he's not all that bad of an actor, so... As for the story itself, it's not that deep. The first act tries to establish, or rather just throw in your face, this idea of fathers unintentionally influencing their children and passing on negative traits, and how that can, affect a child's upbringing and whatnot. And they kind of stay on that path in the 10-minute prologue, and then maybe the next 15, 20 minutes after that. But eventually it hits a point of, yeah, who cares about that? We're not going to talk about it for the rest of the movie. And then by the time the movie ends, there's really no payoff to any of that, and I don't know why they even bothered setting it up. Like, I guess Leigh Whannell really wanted to have a commentary about this type of thing in there, but how he delivered it, how he executed it, Not that effective. Also, there's a twist at around the midpoint or a little after in this movie that I saw coming a mile away, and I really don't understand how anyone was expected to be fooled by it. Now, if you were fooled by this and you've seen the film and you know exactly what I'm talking about because it's really the only twist in the movie, comment below if you were or weren't. I would love to hear what you have to say. Of course, if someone was fooled by it, don't be a jerk and go at each other's throats over this. It's just a movie after all. Be respectful about it in the comments. By the way, like, subscribe, click the links in the description to follow me on other social media platforms. Okay, shameless plug out of the way. Back to the movie. But yeah, it just seemed really cheap and like something you'd find in one of these other disposable Blumhouse horror movies. Not something I would have wanted from a Leigh Whannell horror movie especially. So the concept of this Wolfman story is very different from other typical werewolf lore. There's no changing at the full moon or weakness to silver or any of that stuff. The werewolf aspect is treated more like a disease, an infection, and it doesn't seem to be like a cycle where eventually you'll go back to normal. And that did give it an edge in terms of standing out amongst other werewolf movies, but at the same time, for other people who are used to typical werewolf stories, this might be a little bit disappointing because you're not just getting oh, they turn into a werewolf and then they're avoiding and surviving the night and waiting until dawn, and trying not to get killed by the werewolf. That's not really what it is. The entire movie, for the most part, from the point where Blake gets infected to the end, is essentially like the journey of his transformation into the Wolfman. And now because of that, you get a lot of interesting body horror throughout the film. You get like certain scenes where there's one where he's gnawing on his arm. You get the nails growing through and the normal human fingernails popping off. The grotesque, formations of all the different werewolf-like proportions. I will say, though, I think a lot of people are probably going to be disappointed by the final result of what this Wolfman looks like. Compared to other werewolves in media and in movies and stuff like that, this just doesn't seem like all that striking or iconic of a wolf look. Now, I would say the werewolf that infected Blake looks a lot more like a classic werewolf, but still is subdued in a lot of its physical features outside of like the teeth and the eyes and a little bit of the hair on the face and the claws, which aren't really all that prominent. But there's not a lot of excessive hair or a snout forming out of their face or any of that. It's very minimalist and a lot more man than wolf. I don't want to go into too much spoilers about specifically what he looks like. I think they might have revealed a full clip before the movie actually came out, which is super annoying, and I hate how Blumhouse markets their movies. I completely avoided it like the plague. I think I watched the first trailer of the movie and that was all I watched. Like, if you're going in expecting something that resembles a more modern take on a werewolf, like Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, or Werewolf by Night, or even more recently, that Werewolves Frank Grillo movie that just came out a few months ago, like, you're not gonna get that, is all I'm saying. I just kind of felt while I was watching this movie about a main character who's wasting away due to some kind of infection that turns them into an iconic monster from, fiction. I feel like I've already seen this before, and I have already seen this before and done way better. It was called Maggie from 2015, starring Abigail Breslin and Arnold Schwarzenegger. I know, really weird pairing, but the film was actually pretty solid. Except in that movie, it involves zombies, and that makes a lot more sense for a story like this, in my opinion. Now, it's a horror movie, so naturally you want to know how smart are these characters. Well, they make their fair share of dumb decisions. I mean, Julia Gardner as the mom, she is essentially leaving the daughter alone with Blake numerous times, and while one can argue that, she didn't know what was wrong with him, I mean, he's kind of lashing out. He's gnawing on his arm. He's acting frickin' weird. Probably not the best situation to be leaving your 10-year-old daughter alone with him, or however old she's supposed to be. You'd probably want to keep an eye on her from time to time and not just go walking around without her. And there's one scene in particular that just kind of drove me nuts. So they're running from the one werewolf that infected Blake at one point, and they're on this property, and there's like this greenhouse tent type thing that's supported by these poles in the center, and then the tarp is stretched over top of it or whatever. And it's fitted to look like a tunnel type tent thing. I don't know. I don't garden. I don't know terminology, but they climb on top of it somehow to avoid this werewolf. And the werewolf doesn't just climb up on top of that and get at them anyway. He runs into the greenhouse and then starts slashing from like jumping and slashing from below, and somehow this is able to support their weight. What? Like, okay, it'd be one thing if they like stuck the daughter up there and then they ran away to distract the werewolf or whatever. It's like, no, all three of them are climbing up on top of this. How? What? I don't know. That scene just kind of drove me nuts. The film's not exactly the best with pacing, but I will admit that I was pretty engaged throughout the entire film. I don't think that it really, went on too long. It was like an hour and 45 minutes or something like that. Could it have been a little bit shorter by 10 minutes or so? Maybe, but it's not terrible the way it is. Oh, and I gotta talk about this. So most people probably won't catch this, but as a hunter myself, this drives me absolutely nuts whenever I see this in Hollywood movies. So in the prologue, it shows Blake as a kid and his dad's taking him hunting, and they see a deer, and it's like a pretty immature deer. Like, it's still got the spots and everything, like, a moderately older fawn, but definitely not a doe or a buck yet. And so they're gonna take a shot at it. And what drives me absolutely insane in these movies is they have no idea how hunting actually works. When you are in the sight of a deer, and if you move even slightly, that deer will lock onto you and will not look away until it can verify that it is safe. And if you twitch so much as a muscle, that thing will flick its tail and tear off, getting the heck out of Dodge. So when the deer is clearly like grazing and then looks up and over and around, and they're just like, gets the gun, starts walking a little bit closer, lays down, puts the gun up. Like, no, the deer is not going to just let you make all that noise and move that much without freaking finding you. This just drives me nuts. I mean, most people, again, probably won't catch this because not everyone is a hunter, but I just can't stand when there are hunting scenes in movies and the people directing those movies have absolutely no idea what they're doing. Another one that comes to mind is this movie on Netflix called Caliber from, I want to say 2017. The opening hunting scene in that movie drove me absolutely nuts. I could go on a tangent right now, but I'm just going to cut myself off because I've already talked about this for way too long right now. So all in all, this film isn't amazing, but it's definitely not terrible. I was just expecting a lot more from Leigh Whannell considering how much I like his other movies and I know what kind of director he is and how talented he is. I was just expecting a little bit more of a punch. I didn't expect this to be like a high stakes film or anything, but a bigger crescendo at the very end than what we actually got would have been nice. And while the film is definitely watchable and certainly not a insulting experience, being just okay is really less than ideal, especially when it comes to a film directed by Leigh Whannell. And so for a score out of 10, I guess I could just give it a 6 and call it a day. But I want to hear from you. Have you seen Wolfman yet? What did you think about it? Was this the best werewolf movie you've ever seen? Was this one of the worst? Or are you like me and you think, yeah, it's not terrible, but I kind of wanted a little bit more? Please comment down below. Like I said before, like and subscribe. Hit the links in my description to take you to my other social media platforms where you can find other reviews that don't always make it onto this channel. But until next time, guys, God be with you and take care.